Welcome to another Learning Council podcast. This is your host, LeiLani Coffin, publisher at Learning Council News Media and Research. So our topic today is going to be Ignite Learning with Mathematical Discourse. And I have with me Karou, who is a director or senior director of product content for Mind Research Institute. Kai, you lead a team of learning and game designers, artists, and mathematicians develop the next generation of your math interactive programs. You've also been involved in designing neuroscience-driven edtech solutions for over a decade. So you got a huge history here as a background. I'm excited to actually talk to you because this is amazing, like game design and artists, and this is kind of like the dream world of people who have to deal with curriculum. Like that's what they all want to be doing, right? So this is kind of fun. All right, so ignite learning with mathematical discourse. Let's talk first, a little bit about you. You got into this, and then we'll go into like really kind of what's the main body of this whole conversation we're gonna have today.
Sure. So a little bit about my background. I mean, I kind of grew up as a math nerd myself, really enjoying mathematics and puzzles and building puzzles and anything that was like mathematical thinking. But I actually really disliked math in school, even though I was really good at it, because of how rote the experience was. And anyways, through many years, that led me to pursue the work that I'm doing now, where, as you mentioned, I get to work with a team of designers, artists, mathematicians, where we build the next generation of learning design programs and really think deeply, in particular, about how do we make these experiences meaningful, these experiences engaging, particularly around mathematics. And discourse is part of that.
Yeah, and I love the fact that we're talking about igniting learning because this is a big problem in schools right now. They're seeing, unbelievable levels of absenteeism and just general disengagement. And I think they're really groping around trying to figure out how they present curriculum, right? So you're in this world of, gaming and neuroscience and all the good stuff, right? That the schools really need, right? They definitely really need this. So let's talk about that importance of talking about math, right? And problem solving. Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, well, the importance of talking in general, I mean, math in particular, math talk is a commonly known aspect. It's been brought through much research over the past couple decades, and in many classrooms across America now and across the world, students engage in mathematical discourse. And it's really the research shows that it helps build that deeper conceptual understanding, right? So this comes from, I mean, this goes kind of back to that ancient learning pyramid, right? Where like the difference between hearing something yourself versus engaging in discourse or doing something. When you actually have to talk and explain something, it connects you to a deeper level of meaning and understanding than if you don't have to explain. And in particular, when you have to hear others explain their thinking, it allows you to hear the strategies and the reasonings of others, which helps inform your thinking and changes the way that you think about things. And so it's a really important aspect, in particular with mathematics, to engage students in discussions and problem solving.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I know the market's really bifurcated between, the kids in traditional classrooms physically arriving and being able to do that sort of collective work, and the kids that are online that just get chatbot teaching, right? Like these online virtual, a lot of the online virtual, I'm not going to say all of them, that would be a misrepresentation, but they don't get that, right? And I think that's a really big deal. Not maybe not for every single kid, but certainly what you just pointed out is when you hear somebody else think their way through something, it really has a big impact on you. I know it did for me when I was in school. So, anything else you want to say about that part?
Yeah, well, I'll just add that there's actually a neuroscience basis. We didn't start by sharing this, but Mind Research is a neuroscience-driven organization. We look at neuroscience research in order to inform our design. And there's actually a neuroscience foundation for why using discourse and talk in all classrooms in general and math class is important. Is there's areas of your brain, in particular the Broca's and Wernicke's areas, that are activated specifically when you engage in discourse. And these areas are not activated when you don't engage in discourse. Now, discourse actually doesn't have to mean external discourse. So when you think in your head and you're using words in your head, you are engaging these areas, these language centers of your brain. But if you want to think about a full brain-based learning model, it means you want to activate all the areas of your brain. And part of that is activating the language centers of your brain, which happens when you engage students in discourse.
Yeah. Wow. I don't think there are very many people out there understand the depth of what you just went into. So this is exciting and interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the types of problems and what you're doing to give students, the deeper engagement, ignite their minds, have those meaningful discussions in a classroom.
So the key to engaging students in meaningful discourse is you actually have to have a meaningful problem that they're engaged in to talk about, right? We like to think about it a lot like a book club. If you're going to have a really rich discussion at your book club, you have to have a really rich book that you're talking about and really interesting content that you're actually discussing. And similarly, if you think about math class, what that means is you have to have a task that's actually interesting and engaging for students that they're going to want to engage in discussions around. You're also going to have a task that's immediately accessible to students, right? So that's where the access is so important. This is where visuals are so important. Being able to present tasks visually in a way that students can see it and understand it just by looking at it, not having to have it deeply explained to them, is really important for providing that access that then allows you to engage in meaningful discussions. And then in particular, any problems that are tantalizingly tricky or have some aspect of intrigue, and there's some question and there's some wonder, those are going to be questions that are going to be really ripe to engage in discourse with.
I like that you mentioned visuals, right? Because I remember the days of just worksheets and drilling addition and multiplication, and definitely wasn't very visual. You want to explain that a little bit more? Like, like, draw the picture.
Yeah, well, visuals, I mean, there's been research about this as well. Visuals are so power as a teaching tool in mathematics and in all areas. I mean, if you think about it, the amount of work it takes to convey something in language, just think about a picture and
Mhm.
imagine trying to describe a picture in language. And then imagine now showing someone that picture, right? Immediately, all of the information is conveyed all at once, right? So it allows us to get a much richer and deeper understanding than words. And words also often can be misconstrued, whereas visuals is something that everybody can see the exact same visual. And so it's just a really powerful medium. It's also engaging, right? If you look at, we talk about game-based learning here. If you look at games, right? Games aren't just a bunch of words on the screen. They're visual scenarios that you have to problem solve through. You have to figure out your way through, and you can see everything and you can see the response to everything that you engage in. So especially when you have visuals that have feedback, I mean, that's the
Mhm.
holy grail of how we get to visual and neuroscience-driven learning.
Yeah, there's a dimensionality to it. So it makes, it's conveying itself easier, faster, better, I like this. Okay, so when you're looking at discourse in the classroom, you're actually saying you're wanting to get kids talking about it, right? So if I was teaching alongside this technology, how would I induce that? Like, what are we saying here?
Right. So a lot of engaging in discourse is realizing that it's not about answer getting, right? So much oftentimes in a math class, it's about, I'm going to present a problem to you, find the answer. This is about, let's discuss the mathematics here. So one of the best ways to start, I mean, it's a very popular routine, is just using a notice and wonder, right? What do you notice? What do you wonder about the problem here? In our cases, with some of the visual puzzles we use, we say, what is Gigi trying to do, right? What do you need to help Gigi learn how to do? It's all about starting with that understanding of the question and really pulling out the noticing that kids are observing as a way to start. And kids love sharing what they notice about things. It creates an openness. It creates an opportunity for there to share what they're observing, particularly, that tends to be really unique for different students. And so that's really a great way. I think the way to think about it is not the answer getting, but really the starting to get students to engage and see what they see within the problem without even starting to try to solve the problem.
And you find that this is measurably increasing their understanding?
This is one of the key ways to getting discourse. So if you want to get students engaged in deeper discourse, these strategies is one of the key ways. And yes, there's been a lot of research about the value of discourse in actually growing students' understanding of mathematical concepts and procedures.
Okay, so then let's talk about how technology programs, because this is where we bifurcate with like the traditional teaching patterns, especially, ST Maths enhanced puzzle talks, right? Like the way that you're presenting it, how that prompts this discourse, because there's, what's going on right there.
So what's really great about technology, and we started by talking about meaningful problems, right? If you want to engage in deep discourse, you need a problem that's meaningful. What's great about technology is you can create and invent problem types and scenarios that you could never fabricate in the real world. And the level of engagement that you bring when you bring game-based learning strategies to it are just going to be a lot more engaging than paper and pencil and or just a whiteboard. And so, part of what we do is we really work to leverage technology to build these interactive visual mechanisms where there's a certain task in order to get this penguin across the screen, and you present math in this puzzle-like environment. And it's a really powerful way to get kids talking about math. They're excited because it's a game, right? They're excited because it's fun. They like to talk about all the different aspects that they see. And it's just such a great way to introduce math discourse. So I I shared this at a recent talk I was at. Getting kids to talk in general in class is hard. Getting kids to talk in math class is hard squared. And so
Mhm.
strategies like games and game-based learning can really help lower that barrier to getting students talking in math class.
Now, how does this actually being presented then? Let's say I'm in a classroom. I could maybe use this technology so that individuals are doing the puzzles on their own, and then there's a discourse. But can I also use it whole group and watch that and then evoke discourse?
So one of the ways that we love to do this, and there's many ways to do this, but this is just how we do it, is we build these little puzzle talk lessons. They're embedding puzzles. It's a series of 4 puzzles, and then there's a bonus puzzle if you want to move on to that. And it's meant just for whole classroom discourse. So you're just going to start by looking at the puzzles again, because of their engaging nature, also because their intuitive nature, there's a level of understanding that students can have and they can jump in and access immediately. So again, that's one of the things that technology and other vehicles of design can provide, is that immediate access that then allows you to engage in that discussion, which can be more challenging in other mediums. And we find that fits really well in math in general. It's always critical of where you're going to insert this during the time, because time, as we know, is one of the most limited things when it comes to education and learning. And so it allows you to, by having these little mini lessons or mini experiences, you can either use them as a routine, or as folks like to use them as a launch, but having these really quick opportunities to engage students in discourse, a quick discourse task. It's also very common a lot of teachers use these strategies in general.
Okay, so in my mind, I'm picturing all these little kids sort of like watching and it's happening, and then they're wiggling in their seats, raising their hands and wanting to say what they're seeing because because like you said, it's animated, it's puzzle, it's got like all these dimensions to it. I like this. All right, so let's go on to how it's actually facilitated by the teacher, because they're a lot of times in their own routine. They maybe been doing this for 20 years.
Right.
And now we're talking about this technology and it's fantastic, but I don't know where I'm dropping it in. Just you kind of said a few things about that, but let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah, well, starting to build math discourse in your classroom is a culture building, right? If there's a classroom where kids aren't used to talking, getting them to talk is a process and a growth process. So there is a learning curve, right? Now, when you have tools, such as some of the tools we provide, where you've got a canned, a fully put together experience, You've got guiding questions so that every single puzzle that you're going to put on the screen, there's questions that you can ask associated with each and every puzzle that are customized to it. It lowers the lift in order to start engaging students in that discourse process. But engaging student in discourse is just a process that you start to slowly introduce with your students. You start doing 1 or 2 math discourse tasks a week, and you start asking students these questions. And over a semester, as you continue to do this, you will start to see more and more students starting to engage, starting to want to share, starting to learn also how to put language. Like, if you're not used to putting language to your thinking, that is an extremely new and novel thing to do. That's almost a skill into itself. And so you'll see students' abilities to actually apply language and explain their thinking in the classroom the more that you start to introduce. And part of this also is being really consistent, just like any routine. Sometimes it can be a little bit of pulling teeth at the beginning, but as long as
Mhm.
you're consistent with it, students will engage. And again, having a tool that's engaging and exciting and students want to talk about just makes it so much easier.
Right. Yeah, and good teachers are usually a masters at the long pause after a question, letting the answers percolate and somebody start talking. It's hard. It's hard for adults to do that because they want to insert themselves like, well, this took like 10 seconds too long. But then they finally start evoking that. Now, let me ask you, because I'm curious about this. Are you seeing a marked difference between what grade they start doing this and trying to introduce it maybe to older grades who've already learned math in the old ways?
Yeah, so I mean, ideally, you start engaging students in discourse. You could even start in preschool, but in kindergarten, right? You start when they're young. You get them used to that in math class. You talk in math class, right? You don't just sit and listen and do. You actually talk and engage and you share your thinking. Obviously, if you have students that haven't been experienced that approach as a younger student, it's going to be more challenging to change that expectation, to change. That's part of the culture change. And so it definitely is the longer that you've built a certain schema around how math class works, the deeper that's going to be embedded and the more work it's going to take to transform. And that's where it's even more important to have different tools that are engaging and exciting for students to talk about. I think one of the big things is students just want to feel successful in what they do, right? And so often in math class, it's an environment where students they shut down, they feel like they don't know how to figure it out, and there's just that shutdown. And so what's actually great about doing math talks or puzzle talks or engaging students in math discourse is you can't really fail at here's what I notice and here's what I wonder, right? And you can't really fail at like here's what I see the puzzle is about. And so it's a open invitation for students to engage in an environment where there's no right or wrong answer, which just really helps build that math culture and that math perception.
Yeah, and I would perceive that that could be done at almost any grade. It's only when you get into high school where you have like really serious resistance to show that you don't know what you're talking about as a teenager, right? And then it's almost too late to start something like this. But I really believe you could get puzzles inserted into even grade 6, 7, and 8, and suddenly kids would be like, I want that teacher. I would like to have the teacher that does something fun, or I can watch the guy that I think is so cute on the other side of my classroom like say something, or the girl, like I have never experienced this before. It's a new experience. I'm excited. And when mom asks me when I get home what I got out of this, I can say, hey, math was exciting for the first time, you know? So, I don't think there's really a cutoff. I think when you're approaching it this way, it could be lend itself some awesomeness right from the get-go. But I do agree. I think that, you know, sometimes it gets inculcated out of kids too soon. So what else should we talk about here? Because, this is kind of novel, having math discourse, right?
Mhm.
That's not something I think that people are bringing up in colleges when they're teaching teachers to, go forth and teach math. What else can we say?
I think one of the big aspects around math discourse is it's shifting that culture from the math is about drill and kill or I do, we do, you do to math is about problem solving, right? So that's part of the bigger culture shift. And I mean, this is a culture shift that's been occurring over the last really 3, 4 decades in math education and the importance of problem solving in mathematics curriculum. And you think about, I mean, I work, as you mentioned, in an ed tech world. I work with curriculum designers, artists, game designers, and a lot of problem solving that we do is there's a work that's done independently, and then there's a lot that's done collaboratively. You have to talk about your ideas. You have to share your ideas. You have to defend your thinking. I mean, and this is the way our modern professional world works. We have shifted into a collaborative professional world where collaboration is what breeds the best outcomes, the best designs, the best programs and experiences. And so this whole aspect of math discourse, why it may just sound like, oh, this is just something we're doing in math class. I mean, this is actually about building students to be able to be the world's best problem solvers to help solve all of the problems that we face as a society and train them in. And so that's what this is really about. It's about a culture shift from the previous way that we used to learn math to making math about problem solving so that we can prepare students for the future that none of us know what is going to be ahead.
I love this, but I also love the vision that it's a skill that's a workforce development skill that we're missing. Because you don't want kids arriving in college and they're a physicist and they are supposed to work with the other physicists and do something and they don't work together. This is not going to solve problems. Yeah, I like that. I like that you added that. And anything else we want to add before we move along?
I think that's a really great note to cap with there. That's what we're here to do is we're culture changing.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, good. Well, this has been a really great conversation. Thank you, Kai, and thank you for listening to another episode of the Learning Council's podcast. This has been your host, LeiLani and Ki. Keep listening, keep learning.